I want to come back to the letter that I was reading yesterday about this young woman who is searching for meaning. She's a real searcher, and she has written to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, asking for his guidance in terms of his suggestions in terms of search. And he says to her, you speak of searchers through successive layers of one's being until one reaches the bottom layer. It's like you peel off the skin of an onion, and eventually you get down to the bottom layer. He says, I think you'll find a direct connection between my lines above that I've been talking to you about, the way in which a person finds their direction, with what you have called layers. But I'd like to make a small correction and substitute the word that you've used. I want to substitute the word bottom layer, and I want to substitute it with the word essence. You peel away the layers, not until you get to the bottom, but until you find your essence. And the essence of a Jew's life, he says, lies in their Torah, the way of Torah, the way of mitzvot, that actually expresses our essence. The subject of the essence of a Jew is treated in various sources at great length, and it's not the place in this letter to be able to expand upon that. And then he goes on to say something very interesting. I wanted to add one more point. And that is that every person, and we're talking here at a letter which was written in the early years, probably of the Rebbe's leadership, which would have been in the 1950s. So we're still very, very early after the events of the Second World War and the Holocaust. I wish to add one more point, namely that every person has a duty in his everyday world and in a wider sense to the world at large to contribute his share of enlightenment in terms of Kedusha, that's sanctity, goodness, justice, morality. And needless to say, one can't discharge such an obligation when you're in a state of ceaseless motion, hither and thither, justifying it on the grounds that I'm trying to find the truth. So you're moving, going all over the place, trying to find the truth. But what are you actually doing for the world? This kind of life will not do oneself or the world at large any good. And yet the confused state and the moral and the ethical disintegration of contemporary society makes it all the more imperative for everyone to contribute towards the betterment of the world. It's a challenge that simply cannot be ignored, and one can't spend one's life searching and searching for meaning, in the meantime ignoring what needs to be done in terms of one's influence in the world. And this, of course, was written at a time when lots of young American people were very much involved into themselves, deep searching into self and etc. And the Rebbe's gently pointing out, actually, get on with making a difference to the world. And then finally, this paragraph over here. Insofar as Jewish young men and women are concerned, there's an added obligation to help make up the enormous loss that our people suffered in the European Holocaust. This multiplies the responsibility of every living Jew many times over. Now, I'm not sure that's a message that would ever be heard by any young person today, because you say you have a responsibility to make up the loss of the Holocaust. And he's not talking here about just the loss in terms of the numbers of Jews. He's not talking about numbers. He's talking here about loss in terms of influence, the ability to actually make a difference to the world. That's one of the things that was lost when 6 million Jews were perished in the Holocaust. And he wants to suggest that every young Jewish person has to bear some of this responsibility. And you can't indulge simply in your own little life, doing your thing, doing your own little searching in some way or another. That there's a bigger mission that calls us as human beings, and particularly post-Holocaust as Jews. Wish you all good morning, and we shall turn now to the onliners.